Hey, this is Ken Casey from the Dropkick Murphys, and you're watching Heavy Consequence.
The single version of Citizen I.C.E. We reported on it a couple of weeks ago when it was first announced, and you had a few live versions, but now you have the studio version out, and you reworked the lyrics from an older Dropkick song, Citizen CIA, and turned it into Citizen I.C.E. And why was it so important for you to update that song and to get it out there to the public?
We were on tour in Europe doing Citizen CIA, and then I was just like, Americans view the CIA knowing full well the chaos and trouble and death that they brought around the world with our meddling and, governments around the world and whatnot. But, due to the fact that so much of that is secretive, it always just seemed like more of a lighthearted song. Not that you could call, it was a lighthearted, like poking fun, mock recruiting thing for the CIA, and here we have, I was like, holy shit, these lyrics are like a few changes, like they really hit like ice on the nose, and it just seemed like, so I just started changing it on the fly on tour in Europe, and then Haywire was on tour with us in Europe, and I said, hey, why don't you come out and sing this with me? And even in Europe, this is still in some of the earlier stages of I.C.E., long before they got to Minneapolis and whatnot. People in Europe started to really react to it well. And, I feel like punk rock's job in this moment is to keep speaking up, keep trolling the government, keep defying the government. And I felt like this was a good way to do it. And then by the end of the European tour, us and Haywire had started talking about doing a split. And it just seemed like a no-brainer that, a studio version of this would go on it.
And then even after you decided all that, you had these slayings in Minneapolis, 2 American citizens, and, now you put out the song and, with respect to those 2 individuals as well. And I'd like to hear more about, your thoughts on those recent events.
I mean, those recent events are horrific. And, it just goes to show like that, George Orwell quote there, when you, I forget how it goes, I'm sure but when you're told to disbelieve the proof that you're seeing with your eyes is when, things have really got past the point of no return. I butchered that quote, but moral of the story is we see it with our own eyes, but we're told not to believe it. It just takes the stakes of this up so much in the sense that for the portion of this country that was still okay with what's going on, it's like, well, no, hold on a minute. You just witnessed an execution on our streets and you're still okay with it? Oh, he kicked a taillight out a few weeks ago, so now that's reason to execute someone in the streets? It's like, so us doing this music and us speaking up at shows is all just like, I just feel like it's just you gotta smack, when someone's like, talking nonsense, they might be drunk or something, and their buddy just needs to grab them and just slap them across the face to wake them up. Like, that's what we're trying to do, just like wake the fuck up. It's a disgrace to see that there's any portion of citizens of this country that are okay with what's happening in our streets and what's happening to people. And so, we'll just continue to do what we do and play our part in this resistance, for lack of a better words. That was never, Dropkick Murphys has been a political band since the start, and we've always obviously been very, involved with workers' rights and a lot of other social justice issues. But over the course of our 30 years, we've never been this outspoken. And people act like, well, why are you now? It's like, well, we've reached a whole new level, and in a perfect world, would I love to leave my protest to the lyrics? Sure. But we're beyond that, we're beyond that now. And so I challenge any band that's remotely ever called themselves political in any way or patriotic in any way, that if you think you can leave it to the lyrics, you're taking the coward's way out. And that's just my opinion at this point in time.
You just mentioned other bands. You had a song last year, Who Will Stand With Us? With the Trump administration currently in power, I'm actually surprised by how few bands, punk and hardcore, even outside of that. There's you guys, Green Day might be speaking up a little bit, a Randy from Lamb of God, a few other
Rise Against.
Rise Against. Jack
Yeah.
White has spoken up a lot, but not a lot considering all the bands out there. Do you think some bands are afraid of alienating a certain portion of their following that might not agree with them? Is that might be keeping them, or what are your thoughts on that?
From what I know, obviously I could have my opinions as a music fan or whatever, but from some of my conversations with bands who aren't speaking out, you could have anything from a portion of the band doesn't want to lose fans, doesn't want to get caught in the controversy. You could have some of the older bands in particular that are just like, I don't want to bring the potential of violence on my home and my family. You could have band members that have maybe a wife or something that doesn't have a green card, things like that. So there's some nuance to it. Another reason Dropkick Murphys speaking out, I think it's important to say like, hey, we're all in. We're getting trash trolled, losing fans. And guess what? The water's fine. Come on in. Nothing to be scared about. No one's stepped to me in public yet. It's just trolls on the internet. And if we lose fans and our numbers go down somewhat or whatever, I believe in karma, like doing the right thing, it'll pay off in the long run. And when I say pay off, I don't mean financially, but like what we lose now will come around. And if it doesn't, then punk rock was never all that important in the first place, I guess, or our band was never that important in the first place. So I would like to say I haven't really talked about it publicly at all, but I'll do it now. Is my Dropkick Murphys and Michael Fanone, who was a police officer that was almost killed in the January 6th insurrection, protecting the members of Congress and Senate on Capitol Hill, who also happens to be an old school punk and was at the first ever Dropkick Murphy show in DC in 1996. And him and I have talked about trying to spearhead something to help motivate other bands to get involved. And so we're in the process of launching something called Down for the Cause of Saving Democracy. We asked Rise Against, and they were right in. So at the moment, it's, Michael Fanone, Dropkick Murphys, Rise Against, and we're building a platform that we can take to other bands and hopefully get a lot of other bands to sign on and join in. And if they don't, or people don't want to, then us and Rise Against will do what little we can. But I feel like the motivation behind this is there's strength in numbers. One loud voice accomplishes more than a voice that's not unified. And also some of these bands that are thinking about it but don't want to take the leap, maybe they say, oh, okay, well, doing it within a larger movement is less scary, so hopefully when we roll this all out in the very near future, it'll grow into, from the punk rock side of things, maybe grow into something larger where we can all at the end of the day be proud of what we did in this moment.
You mentioned Michael Fanone, and he was just recently on Capitol Hill wearing a Dropkick Murphys hoodie, letting someone have it about what went down on January 6th. What was that like to see him there, just speaking his mind and being so courageous?
You need people who are not afraid to show up, right? Like it's one thing to be up in opposition conceptually. It's another thing to be at Congress or be at these protests, whatever level you're at. If you say, there's a No Kings protest, but I got to work, I got to do this, or I got plans, because there can be that feeling of like, I'm just a drop in the bucket, whether it's a band or an individual, but everybody needs to show up. And even if that just means showing up and holding a sign, I just think that it's part of the numbers growing. And but like Michael Fanone's a great example of someone who's really showing up and sticking his nose in there and speaking truth to power. And he can speak it from experience of having put his life on the line. And Dropkick Murphys can speak it from the sense of like, our message has never changed in 30 years. So like if people are surprised that we're outspoken in this moment, I would say, were you listening? Like, what did you expect from Dropkick Murphys right now? And we're a unique band in the sense that like we've always had the backs of first responders, and we've had a big military fan base. And with a white working class audience, a lot of our audience is the prime people that shifted when Trump came down that escalator and Steve Bannon and all these people started to spread that lie and divide Americans amongst each other. It was probably a lot of the people that listened to Dropkick Murphys who were twisted in that. And so there's a lot of people that are upset that we're not going along with the narrative in their minds. But if you really look at Dropkick Murphys over the course of our career since the beginning, we've never changed. I've had the same haircut for 30 years and the same political message. Like, we haven't changed. So it's nice to be able to, to hang our hat on that, so to speak,
Yeah, and you get your boots on the ground too. I mean, you were at a anti-ICE rally with Boston labor unions recently, and I heard you talking about a general strike. What do you think could be, the benefits of that?
I mean, no kings and all that is great, like, because it's another thing where it visually shows someone who's on the sidelines of like, okay, I don't have to. People with a conscience and a soul have felt like they're in the minority when that's not the reality. It's just that MAGA is just a loud minority, that make people think that they have control and power. And I think when they see these millions of people in the streets, it might inspire others to say, okay, I'm not so out on an island here. So that's why Dropkick Murphys has felt like, okay, we've played a bunch of the protests, we've done a bunch of stuff, but a general strike where you're shutting it down from a financial perspective, from a work perspective, money. Look at the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing, people are canceling subscriptions. Like that's what changes these, corporations that'll sell their soul for a buck. They're not having a come to Jesus moment. They're saying, we got to answer to our stockholders. So I think really the power of shutting it down. And I get it. Like when we post about a general strike, a lot of people will say, well, I'm supposed to take a day off from work and that hurts my wallet. I get it. Temporary pain can lead to long-term progress. Whereas what good is it to say, I don't want to lose a day's work. I got to pay my bills. I understand that. But working people are slowly being choked out in the long run. Short-term struggle is worth it for the long-term success.
Your causes are not only domestic. Last year, you flew out to Ukraine. You were handing out humanitarian aid. What propelled you to take that flight?
I got just point blank asked to go. And it's kind of like when you're a kid or whatever, when someone like challenges to a fight or something, anything you've done where you got to make a decision. Like I was asked, do you want to go? And I said, yeah. And then it was too late. And I had to, whereas if someone said, hey, I'm going to send you this itinerary and you can look through it and see what the dangers are and think about it for a month and talk to your family and let them talk you out of it. It was just like, do you want to go? I said, yeah. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane, and one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And it's also part of like putting your money where your mouth is. If you're going to be a band that asks people to follow you into action, you better be willing to lead the way. And, I found the Ukrainian, and we've always, by the way, we had never played Ukraine as a band, but we've played a lot of border countries where we would meet tons of Ukrainians saying, you got to come to Kyiv, why do I always have to cross to see you in Austria or see you in Poland or wherever? And so we've got a lot of friends and a fan base that are Ukrainian. And I've been obviously inspired by how they've stood up to a bully the way they have, but not until I went over and did this trip did it really see it in action. When the convoy, because I was driving an ambulance, and we were driving ambulances, fire trucks, all stuff donated by a lot of, the convoy started in Finland. I met them in Warsaw, and we drove in, fire trucks, ambulances, all this stuff. And the minute we crossed the border from Poland, there was all these people, little kids and everything, just waving and saying thank you. And so the need was there, but the Ukrainians would say, just as much as we need the equipment, we need to be reminded that the world hasn't forgotten us and that America hasn't forgotten us. And by Americans coming there, it gives them strength and hope. But air raid sirens every night. Looking across from your hotel at buildings with holes in it, drone attacks. And then they wake up in the morning in Kyiv, for example, and then they go to work and like it's every other day, and their attitude is like, hey, you can only hide in the basement for so long. And so just very inspiring people, and America, I hope we don't continue to forget our allies.
And punk and hardcore has a long history about rebelling against government injustices and social injustices, whether it be the Clash or Dead Kennedys, Sex Pistols in England. Obviously that's the music you grew up on. How much did that influence you? I mean, with Dropkick taking the stand now and throughout your entire career.
Well, yeah, because I always thought that's what punk was supposed to be about. Obviously, not every band, not every song, but just the rebellious attitude. It was like, when you're hearing the Pistols sing about the Queen, it's like, look, I don't even know the Queen, and I don't know, it doesn't have anything to do with my life, but I like this. They're angry, and of course, growing up equally inspired by like Irish music growing up in the community I did in Boston. It was like double whammy on the Queen and the British government. But then as you got older, into your later teens, and you went into the workforce and you got involved with union politics, and you realized what the Reagan era had done to destroying the backbone of America and unions and working people. And that's where the wealth gap really started to explode, and where the fairness in media started to dissolve, and dark money started to come more and more into politics, and we just started down that slippery slope that all led to where we are now. And then, so many of the bands that I grew up with singing about Reagan, I might not even have understood it because I was a little younger, but it was the same thing as the Queen. Fuck Reagan. And then I got a little older and I was like, yeah, fuck Reagan. And then it got to the Bush era, and it was, more of the same. All these bands speaking out against Bush. But what I always say is like Bush and Reagan didn't have an army of trolls coming at you. So maybe people had a little more courage to speak out about it than them. It's like Donald Trump, MAGA, that's 10 times worse than either of those, two eras. So like the music should be really pissed off. And I think it's starting to get to that point, where bands are slowly like writing songs about this and speaking out against it. And I think the tables are turning, and if public opinion wise, but if the bands need to be, music in general should be the spearhead of that.
I don't know if there's any band that has represented its hometown roots as much as Dropkick Murphys. The new split LP with Haywire is called New England Forever. You guys always, shouted proudly about Boston and New England for 30 years. Why is that also important for you to represent your hometown and where you grew up?
I feel like we're cut from a different cloth up here, you know what I mean? And we've always just wanted to rep it. We've always kind of repped, the Boston area since we started. Our very first van that we ever had was, the subway system here is called the MBTA, Mass Bay Transit Authority. And they have these handicap vans, and we bought one of those at an auction. So we bought this handicap van that the MBTA would use to, pick up handicap people in their homes and take them to the train. And that was our first touring van. And it had the high bubble roof, and we actually peeled the roof off on a low overpass, and we continued to tour in it for 2 more years with the roof peeled back, to the point where in those days I was the navigator. I had the map book. There was no GPS, and Rick, our original guitar player, always drove, and I would have to, when it rained, I would have to hold an umbrella over his and mine head inside the van because it became a convertible, unfortunately. But we'd roll up to shows in this MBTA van, and you know, back in those days, like the kids would all be hanging out on the sidewalk in that scene or whatever city it was. And they'd be like, holy shit, you guys just don't shut the fuck up about Boston on stage. You roll up in a Boston subway van. It was just something we were always about. And, you know, Haywire, you know, 30 years into it for us, Haywire has been a real inspiration to us because they remind me so much of us in the beginning days. The way they tour, the way they represent the city and how much pride they take in everything they've created. And it's been, you know what I mean? Sometimes you need to see like that generation doing it to like re-inspire you and remind you who you were all along and why you got into this in the first place. So, us and Haywire is like a big brother, a little brother, or in reality, probably more like a father-son relationship in a good way, in a great way. And so it's been fun to do stuff together with them, touring and releasing music.
Finally, one more thing. What's your message to fellow Americans during these uncertain times?
Get out there now and make some noise before, or maybe the chance to do so will have passed us by. And that's how it happens in these authoritarian takeovers. People kind of are in that, period of disbelief, followed by a period of having lost their opportunity. So that's why we're willing to put it all on the line now, because I don't want to look back and say, man, I should have spoken up when we had the chance. So do it now before you can't do it at all.